Welcome to Talking Business in Delhi. I'm Yogita Lamai. India is renowned for its red tape, the difficulty of getting things done, whether you're a business or an individual. According to the World Bank, it takes an average of 29 days to open a company, and firms here have to comply with 33 separate tax procedures. And then they have to deal with 29 different states, all with different rules on land purchase, employment and the environment. But things do seem to be improving slightly. In 2014, India was ranked 142nd in the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index. In 2015, it had moved up 12 places to 130th. So there's still a long way to go, but have things become easier? Well, to discuss that with us, we've got a panel of experts. Kunal Bahel, the co-founder of Snapdeal, one of the country's largest e-commerce platforms. Mr. Amitabh Kant, who's the Secretary of the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion. Satya Vadlamani, who's the Managing Director of pharmacy firm Murli Krishna Pharma. And Mr. Sunil Vachhani, who's the Managing Director of Dixon Technologies, which has contracts with some of the best-known electronics firms across the world. Right at the outset, I'm going to ask each one of you, has it become easier to do business in India?
Entrepreneurship has become a matter of pride for the country. I remember when we were starting our company a few years ago, people used to wonder that probably these boys didn't get a job, that's why they are starting a company. I think that has definitely changed. The smartest people in the country out of all the top engineering and MBA colleges are now starting companies, and that's the big change that's happened.
A place to do business in. So over the last 68 years, we've added a huge number of rules, regulations, procedures, acts. A lot of that dismantling has started happening now, and India has definitely become a far more easier place, but this is still work in progress.
I have not seen that change coming in, but I'm seeing the winds change. And I'm sure that in a couple of years it's going to change a lot more. 2004 till now has not been the best period to run a business, but the winds of change are coming on, and these, once they really come to the ground level, are going to make a lot of difference to this country.
If we talk about our sector, the sector that we recently got into, mobile phone manufacturing in the country, India is one of the fastest growing markets for smartphones and feature phones in the world. We sell or consume almost 17 million phones a month, and 2 years back we were hardly manufacturing maybe about 10% of the total requirement. But I think in the coming 2 years, we'll be manufacturing almost 70% of what we consume in India. So that tells you about the change that is happening in the country, an extremely positive change.
Mr. Kant, you're the man behind the government's Make in India and Startup India campaigns. What, according to you, is the one biggest difference that this government's been able to make since it's come to power?
The government is absolutely clear that Indian entrepreneurs must be allowed to fly. We must make India one of the easiest places and the simplest places to do business in. And this would mean that you just dismantle a whole lot of procedures, rules, regulations down the line. And from 1st of April, we'll be putting out a mobile app which will enable all startups to do their registration in just one single day across 5 different departments through this mobile app. And I think the government is very clear that Indian startups must grow, must flourish. And as we go along, this would mean that departments across sectors must become simpler, they must converge, they must integrate, they must work all together to ensure that the entrepreneurship of India must grow and prosper.
Satya, when you're running your factory on a day-to-day basis, you said you've seen the winds of change, but you haven't really seen change on the ground as yet. What are the difficulties you face?
Even today, for example, if I upload a tax form, just to give this thing, sometimes uploading doesn't take place, sometimes there are problems. There is still the contact between the person who has uploaded the form and the tax officer involved. The day all these things change, I'm not just talking about the tax, I'm talking about anything. If a notice is served, let it be served online. Let the responses go online to the department concerned, so that it becomes a response which is answered to not by any one particular person. It's not a visibility factor, it becomes a very clear-cut, actual judicial kind of an answer which you're giving. There's no one person who's going to take care of your case, then you're going to bring corruption down. My thing is, that corruption at grassroots level needs to disappear for the country to become a smooth place to work in.
One of the findings of the World Bank is that in India you have to comply with at least 33 different tax procedures. How big a difficulty is that?
No doubt it is difficult right now for anyone to understand India's tax structure. It takes a lot of time because it's very complex. But I think that's going to change now because we have the goods and services tax coming in. And that's going to take away a lot of the disability factors that are there in the system right now.
Kunal, you've talked about how there are several startups which actually started up here but have moved away. Your company has chosen to remain. But what are the problems? Why have startups moved out of India?
I think traditionally raising capital as an Indian company was quite cumbersome. I don't think it's eased that much yet. But what has changed is because the whole perception of India has changed materially. I just came back from a trip abroad where I met a lot of investors, large global pension funds, etc. And there is just so much euphoria, positive euphoria around India and India's startup ecosystem that now investors don't bother whether you're a Singapore incorporated Indian company or an Indian incorporated Indian company because they want to be part of the story.
See, India is a very large country. It's bigger than 24 countries of Europe. You need to work in partnership with the states. And therefore, much of the action in reality is shifted to the states. One of the key things for us was that how do you make the states change? So every single state of India today, whether it's Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, they're all competing to become easy and simpler places to do business in. The second point is that when you start in a large country from the top, then the mindset, to my mind, mindsets have changed at higher levels and the trickling down effect has started, and it'll take you another 2 to 3 years to really spread this whole revolutionary change.
We're in this climate of global economic gloom, and in that India is seen as the bright spot. And do you think that if it takes long to get all of these things actually moving, that India is going to lose the great opportunity it has at the moment?
I think over a period of next 5 years, India is going to emerge as a hub, global hub for manufacturing, not only for India, but I think exporting to the world. What we're lacking today is an ecosystem because we import a lot of our components from China, even though we have a lot of advantages. But if you're importing all your components, there's obviously a disability factor. So the question is, why is there not a strong, robust component ecosystem in place? And I think one of the main reasons is that it's very difficult for a new entrepreneur to come in and start a business because of the huge cost of acquisition of land and building. So to give you an example, if a vendor was supposed to come in and set up a factory for even, let's say, small factory about 30,000 square feet, it'll cost him somewhere around at least $2 to $3 million to set it up. And we don't expect any new entrepreneur to come in and put in that kind of capital.
Given the internet and the increasing penetration of the internet, you've seen a lot of tech startups. How many of the startups you're seeing are actually in the manufacturing place? People who have the courage to put up a physical manufacturing facility.
One of the things we've done in the Startup Action Plan is to spread 500 tinkering labs across India, create a huge number of incubation centers, create research parks all over the country so that students really become innovators of tomorrow. And that really, to my mind, is this industry-academia linkage, and bring that into very sharp play in the days to come.
Is that what you're seeing when you meet young entrepreneurs today?
Yeah.
Do you think they're still veering towards a tech startup, which may be slightly simpler in that sense in our country than in manufacturing?
No startup is simple. I don't agree that it's only tech where we are seeing entrepreneurial spirit. I'm seeing many, many companies in the area of robotics, consumer packaged goods, etc., where manufacturing is now starting to happen in India. Because the entrepreneurs feel, hey, there's a great competitive advantage we have because we are technology first into manufacturing. So they're not thinking about only importing machines, they're thinking about innovating in manufacturing within India.
You mentioned the goods and services tax earlier. The government had set a deadline for itself of the 1st of April this year for it to actually roll out. The bill hasn't cleared Parliament, so it doesn't look like that deadline is something they will meet. Is that disappointing for you?
Today the number of taxes we pay and the number of refunds we have to take are n number of them. I mean, you have consultants for practically every tax story that you have in place. You need to cut out all that. You need to make it into a simple single form, and we are waiting for that to happen.
Right now what happens is some states have very arbitrary taxation for goods coming into the state. So a seller in a particular, let's say Gujarat, wants to sell something into Kerala, there may be an arbitrary tax that may get put on that seller. And I think all that should go away, because it's in India's benefit that there's free and fair commerce between all states and businesses between the different states.
After a short break, we're going to talk about the other core things that businesses need to flourish. Infrastructure, things like land, power, even financing. That's what we'll continue discussing on Talking Business right after the short break. Welcome back to Talking Business. We're here in Delhi asking whether India is becoming an easier place to do business. But before I turn to our panel of experts, here's our comedy consultant Colm O'Regan with what he thinks businesses need from governments in this week's Talking Point.
Promising a business-friendly environment. Whoop-de-doo. Just for once, I'd love to see a politician promise to get tough on business and the causes of business, but that's never going to happen. But has their one set of election promises to business been actually kept? India, in the last quarter, became the fastest growing big economy in the world.
So India really has vast untapped potential, and the prediction is if all goes more or less according to plan, it will be growing at upwards of 5% out to 2050.
Is this Prime Minister Modi's doing? He's been travelling the world asking large companies to come make in India.
So the Indian government has launched several initiatives like Make in India to stimulate interest in India, to stimulate investment and to drive manufacturing.
But how can we hold politicians to their promises, or indeed measure them? Now, if it was a business promise, you might ask the business to do a sort of a pipeline calculation, where they would say, we promise this, we are this much confident that it's going to happen, therefore the value of the promise is this. In theory, you could do the same with political promises. But of course that presupposes that politicians have any influence on what actually happens in business.
Streamlining is the name of the game. Having policies that make it easy to move to a country, policies that make doing business easy.
But let's come at it from another angle. If you could stretch your imagination a little and imagine that I am a successful businessman, what is it that I would want, as a typical capitalist, from a government to make a business-friendly environment?
Business leaders want the same thing. They want stability in policy. They want stability in what to expect from the politicians. They want to know that if they have been told that tax rates will be stable or will be decreasing, that that's going to happen. They want to have stability in the macroeconomic environment.
To make it easier on the politicians, let's do it in a language they understand. Slogans and acronyms. Here's one they could remember. THRIVE. It's an acronym to make me, your average unfettered capitalist, feel very welcome in a business environment. The T stands for taxes, or lack of them. Just to get me started. Cut the taxes at the start so I can get established and maybe leave them low all the way through. H for hidden. Hide your low taxes behind a load of very complicated but perfectly okay tax arrangements. R is for regulation. Relax it. I is for infrastructure. Invest in the infrastructure that will make my life as a businessman, bringing all the great jobs to your country, a little bit easier. Say, for example, at the airport. Why can't my plane land very near to where my taxi takes off? V is for visa, as in don't make it so hard for me to get one. Finally, E is for exit strategy. If things don't work out for me, don't make it too hard for me to go home. So there we are. Thrive. My recipe for a business-friendly environment. Enjoy.
Colm O'Regan there with his thoughts on what businesses need to thrive. And you can watch more of his films on our website, bbc.com/talkingbusiness. Now, one of the things that Colm talked about is infrastructure. How difficult is it to get land in India, Mr. Vachani?
For any new entrepreneur coming into the country, it is extremely difficult because land is extremely expensive. What we've been suggesting to the government is to follow a plug-and-play model wherein a new entrepreneur coming in, you give him land and building at a nominal rental per month so that he doesn't have to put up that money upfront and he doesn't have to go to banks for offering collateral and getting the money.
The land bill is another one that has been stuck in Parliament, but it's also something that the government changed its position on midway after they came to power. Do you think that impacted the credibility of the government?
One of the major things which the government is doing is creating these new industrial corridors. For instance, it takes 14 days for goods to reach from the northern part of India to the ports of India, but by 2018 you will have a container train which will put goods within 14 hours. So from 14 days to 14 hours. And both sides of this, the government is taking land and creating new industrial cities. Infrastructure is being built, drainage, sewage, solid waste, and all these projects will be completely de-risked, and you will have plug-and-play facilities for investors to just walk in and start manufacturing.
I'm going to come to the other important thing that businesses need is skilled manpower. Whichever sector you're in, I think that's critical. What's the situation?
I think it absolutely depends on the sector. I feel why technology companies are growing so fast in India, whether it's in manufacturing, whether it's in software, is because we are blessed with 3 million engineers a year, and that's very unique to our country. I think the companies like ours and others wouldn't have gotten created if we didn't have the deep talent pool when it comes to skilled engineers.
Is that a similar situation that you're seeing?
Every town has a pharma college. So you have pharmacists by the dozens. Yes, there are certain problems, but they are surmountable. They are not so huge that they can't be handled. But you have tech people. You have good quality tech people in India who are hardworking, who know their jobs and who are skilled. So I don't think pharma has any problem in terms of getting the right kind of people in.
You know, when I talk to manufacturers, it's often one of the biggest complaints I hear, whichever part of the country I'm in, that they're unable to find skilled people to work in their factories. Is that something you've experienced at all?
We have an electronics skill sector council which is responsible for training thousands of engineers. So I think what has happened is we now have a pool of engineers who are readily available and can be absorbed in the industry in a very short period of time. So I think the Skill India mission of the government has really made a key difference, and that has changed a lot of things.
Let me now come to another sort of important thing. I think you've talked about this a little bit, which is transport.
That's right.
And it's very integral to your
Sure.
e-commerce business as well. How good is the transport infrastructure in India?
Look, I think it's no secret that the underlying infrastructure in India is not as developed, and there is a lot that needs to be done. We've invested just in the last year probably $300 to $400 million as one company into infrastructure. We actually started seeing it as a competitive advantage more than anything else, and a barrier to entry for others. That said, I think there is still a long way to go in terms of just road transport specifically. A lot of the goods that we ship to consumers go by air for that very reason. If road transport was faster, more seamless, with less barriers along the way, I think we would use it a lot more.
Not all companies would perhaps have money to invest in building up infrastructure like that. Do you think it will work as a deterrent for startups? What's the government doing about fixing it?
One of the key things we must understand that's happening in India is that India is the only country in the world which has 1 billion mobile. India is the only country with 1 billion biometrics. In the last 45 years, we had given bank licenses to 14 banks. In the last 5 months, we've rolled out about 23 new bank licenses. So the cost of transaction when you link up mobile telephony, smartphones, biometrics, and the new bank accounts, this is radically going to change things. I mean, it's going to bring down the cost of transaction to 1/10 of what it was.
So I'll give you an example. We import some components from China, and I think about a year back we were paying almost about $1,500 for a 40-foot container. That cost has come down from $1,500 to hardly about $250. But when I bring that container from the port to my factory in Noida, it cost me almost $2,000, almost a lakh of rupees. So I have to bring that container in, manufacture, and then I have to export that product and again take the container back to the port. So there's another $2,000 being added to the cost. So how can I really compete if I have to pay that kind of cost for the inland haulage?
Now, you can't open a newspaper today in India without reading about the millions of dollars of investment coming into Indian startups. Is it easy to get funding?
Just in the last 1 year, some $3 to $4 billion came into just technology startups in India. And I think the trend is going to only move in the right direction. And the big reason for that is we will have 1 billion internet users in the near future. And every investor in the world wants access to companies that are solving problems profitably for these 1 billion internet users. We are the last large internet frontier left in the world.
That's for startups. Is it a similar experience for companies
It
that are
is.
already running?
In India, financial charges are very high. We need to work on the financial charges because at the end of the day, if I'm competing with a company that's working on LIBOR rates all over the world, and I'm paying an additional 6 or 7% over and above the LIBOR, I think somewhere something is going wrong. One simple example I'll tell you, 1 year we went through a massive loss when US went into recession in 9-10. Even our company went into a loss at the time. That year, my turnover of my company was around 20 million US. And the financial charges I paid were 2 million US. So my answer stands. I mean, I'm justified in what I'm saying because I paid, I think, to the bank much more than what I even earned. It was a loss making. That year was loss making for us, enormous loss making. But I paid a lot towards financial charges. I had to pay it.
I would say that people who are exporting, I think there is a level playing field. But for companies who are manufacturing in India for India, there is a bit of a problem. So I'll give you an example. We were manufacturing set-top boxes and we're supplying to the large MSOs, multi-system operators. And when we're giving them credit, obviously we're borrowing at a much higher cost. Whereas if they're importing from China or from any other country, they're paying in dollars. So I think one of the solutions is that the banks must offer the buyer's credit in US dollars to all the companies. I think a very few companies have access to that facility right now.
Is that something the government can help with, or do you think you just need to let free market reign?
No, government constantly looks at policy measures, and in the electronic sectors we've taken a number of policy measures, but we must understand that India is part of a globalized world. India is a very integral part of the global supply chain, and India's manufacturing must become extremely cost competitive. The productivity levels must rise. Total factor productivity must rise. You can't keep subsidizing Indian manufacturing.
Well, on that note, thanks very much for joining us, Kunal Bahel, Amitabh Kant, Satya Vadlamani and Sunil Bachchani. That brings us to the end of this edition from Delhi and indeed the Talking Business series. We'll be back soon. Bye-bye.